Hi, this is Len from Ocean Park, Maine. Welcome to the Kindle Chronicles. Today is Friday, October 9th, 2020. This is episode 636 of the show. And we will hear from Dean Koontz in the interview. I think this is the third time we've talked to him about one of his books, and the latest one is titled Elsewhere. It was published this week by Thomas & Mercer, an imprint of Amazon Publishing. It's a great book. Really enjoyed it, and I learned some things about quantum physics that I didn't know about, having to do with alternate universes. In the news, I'm going to take a kind of a deep dive into the House Antitrust Subcommittee's report, which came out on Tuesday. It's a 450-page report, and there was a really insightful piece about Stephen Levy I'm going to walk you through, and then also an article in The Information. And then Amazon itself put up a post pushing back pretty hard, I thought pretty effectively, on the direction that this report seems to be pointing. Let's get started. Before I jump into the antitrust story, I do want to remind you that Prime Day is going to be next week, October 13th and 14th, Tuesday and Wednesday. I think it'll probably start midnight Seattle time on Tuesday. I expect there will be lots of deals on Amazon devices. The thing I'm looking for is a 34-inch Fire Edition TV. We have a TV here in the cottage that's a Roku, and you have to use 2 clickers, and I'm sure there's going to be something pretty reasonable to get a smaller TV. The Fire Edition TV I like because I just use 1 clicker. I can switch to the local news if I want, and then I use, the Spectrum, it's called here, their clicker. But everything else, it's just 1 clicker, and it's very simple to have it set up in Fire TV mode built into the television. The House Antitrust Subcommittee, it has a much longer name than that, but that's the essence of it for this story, has spent 16 months and gathered nearly 1.3 million documents, and on Tuesday it came out with a report which I've seen it described as 449 pages and also 451 pages. So let's call it 450. It's a big work. And in the tech tip, I'm going to tell you how I downloaded it to my Kindle to read it easily. The best analysis that I have seen this week of the report comes in a newsletter that I receive each Friday from Stephen Levy, who's a senior writer at Wired magazine. It's called Plaintext, and he's such a good writer. He's the perfect person to write about this story, partly because he has so much history. The companies that are in the hot seat here, and the CEOs were all called in to testify before this committee, maybe a month or two ago. Apple, Amazon, Facebook, and Google. Stephen Levy has been at the beginning of the founding of those companies and knew all the CEOs. And so when the committee talks about how they have monopolistic power and there needs to be action taken, he has lived the whole story of the creation of these companies, and that puts a very interesting spin on it. He writes that they did deep research, gathered all these documents, and that they had an unyielding thesis. He sums up the thesis this way: big tech is too big, too bad, and fights dirty. They were able to get lots of evidence. They have the power of subpoena and found plenty of evidence of bullying, self-interested, and anti-competitive behavior. He summarized the bad behavior, and he's kind of, in this article, lumping Amazon in with the other companies, although he says, look, these companies are very different. But in general, his description of what the committee found was the tech overlords have built monopolies and weaponized them. They run platforms that favor their own products, and they use the data they gather to gain advantage over marketplace competitors or target them for buyout. They have the power to set prices, and they do so without sanction. But then he steps back and he takes a larger view. He says the report reveals something else. Quote, a sense that the committee has selectively invoked a lot of the ills of our economic and political system to make tech itself a villain. And the thesis that he's got in this piece is that a lot of the things which could be pointed out here don't just apply to these 4 big tech companies. They would apply to large companies in general. He examines what he calls the attack vector of the report. One question he asks is, how come Microsoft wasn't involved? It's $1 trillion company in valuation. It's got a history of market power that actually brought it before the Antitrust Division in a previous antitrust case in the browser wars. Certainly has been acquiring companies at quite a clip. So that's an interesting question. I don't know what the answer to that one is, but a broader question which Levy thinks the committee doesn't grapple with is, did technology advances themselves lead these companies from their idealistic startups phase to trillion-dollar predators? He points out that each of the 4 companies has embraced digital progress to deliver real value to billions of people, creating products that we consume enthusiastically. Well, amen to that, because when you look at Amazon's approval ratings in any survey that comes out, the customers are certainly not asking for any changes in all of the services that we get from this company. And the other 3 companies, I think it's similar, although Facebook is probably getting more pushback, especially in the political season, than the rest. Levy says, no, there isn't anything built into technology which automatically turns big tech companies into something that's so much different than other large companies. He says that it's less about the uniqueness of tech platforms than it is about how our system, meaning our general business economic system, allows companies from any industry to conduct themselves. And he goes through a list of the points raised about the tech companies. Acquisitions, they're acquiring sometimes their competitors. Look at the banking industry. Look at media. Look at airlines. They're favoring house brands. This is one that particularly applies to Amazon. Look at supermarket house brands and how they get displayed in favorable positions in supermarkets. Apple charging 30% to third-party app developers. Look at the cable networks and how they favor their own content. And then the one that I like how he treats oh my, it's shocking. They're lobbying. They're spending millions of dollars to try to get Congress to give them favorable treatment. And Levy writes, like every other big industry in America, and hey, Congress, whose fault is that? So the tech companies evolved like others, quote, into the power trip that characterizes the unrestrained Hobbesian way we do business in America. That's his basic point here, that as these companies get big enough, there's just sort of a natural pull into this Hobbesian way. Basically, that's a literary way to refer to the lack of restraint on big companies. He has a link in this piece to Hobbes, and I was reminded that a key part of that philosopher's point of view was that without government, the life of man would be, quote, solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. So he's seeing that there's a larger issue here about how we handle business regulations, specifically antitrust regulation. He writes, in other words, big tech is doing business the American way. Exposing the sins of Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Google is like pulling a curtain from a mirror. That's why I agree with many of the committee's general conclusions. Levy writes, we need stronger antitrust law, stricter enforcement, and a set of rules that protects small businesses from the power of dominant players in all industries. Unfortunately, the prospects for legislation aren't rosy. The House Subcommittee couldn't get the minority to join this painstakingly thorough report. It might be off base to blame technology for our woes, but you can't go wrong blaming politics. The information is another good source of information about technology, and the same day, Tuesday, October 6th, when this came out, they described the report as a prelude to what the real regulators in the Department of Justice and elsewhere in the government might actually focus on in a case that they might bring. They said that the recommendation for structural separations is code for breakups and prohibiting certain dominant platforms from operating in adjacent lines of business. These were things which the article in the information said they're likely aimed at preventing Amazon from selling its own goods in competition with outside merchants on Amazon's marketplace. Marketplace, for example. Amazon responded the day that the report came out, October 6th, with an item at the Day One blog. It's a long piece, 1,400 words, and the case is summarized with effect by the headline and the subhead for this blog post. The headline is, "Fringe notions on antitrust would destroy small businesses and hurt customers." And then the subhead, "Misguided interventions in the free market would kill off independent retailers and punish consumers by forcing small businesses out of popular online stores, raising prices and reducing consumer choice and convenience." I wonder, because some of this harkens back to the trust busting under Teddy Roosevelt, and I think when the Sherman Antitrust Act was first created, were those companies, the railroads, Standard Oil, did they have 80% favorable, customer reactions? I don't know if they were doing surveys back then or not, but I guess I'd be surprised. The language is pretty salty here. They're taking aim at regulatory spitballing on antitrust. I looked that up in the Urban Dictionary, and to spitball something is to shoot ideas out in the open. It may cause yourself to seem like a complete dunce. So that was a well-chosen word. I'll have a link to this post. It goes on to make 4 very clear, well laid out points. The first is that retail is a thriving and extraordinarily competitive sector of the economy. Second, online and physical retail stores compete directly every day for the same customers. And then it moves into Amazon and its third-party sellers. And there's interesting history there from when this first was initiated by Amazon and why. And then the fourth point is small businesses and consumers would both suffer if Congress and the regulators were to move in this direction. Here's the part where there's history that I sort of knew, but it was good to see it laid out. In 1999, Amazon first welcomed third-party sellers to the store to sell their items. And they were initially separate. You'd have Amazon stuff, and then you'd have to do a different search to search through the third-party sellers. And customers didn't like it. They didn't go to a second store, and it was deemed a failed experiment. So then they went to putting the third-party competitors into the same store with Amazon stuff. The advantage was increased selection from the point of view of the customer, more things to choose from, lower prices, more satisfied customers, and they pretty quickly saw it took a while, actually. I mean, this is 20 years ago. It was deemed to be a win for customers, sellers, and Amazon. In the first year, third-party sales represented 5% of unit sales, and currently they're running at 60% of all physical product sales on Amazon, and they're growing faster than Amazon's own products. They argue that Amazon has a strong incentive to support third-party sellers because they typically make the same revenue on those third-party sales. So they don't really care whether it's bought by a third-party seller or themselves. But I think beyond that, they see a mutual benefit in they're creating a marketplace that has benefits, and everybody benefits when a marketplace is that attractive to customers. And in fact, that same model is spreading throughout the world, including U.S. companies like Walmart, eBay, Etsy, and Target that also have marketplaces that mix what they call first-party and third-party sellers. My take on this is that I like the fact that when I search on Amazon, I can see things from small vendors. I've had good experience buying from some of these third-party vendors. I've gotten good customer support, and I have some confidence in using them because they're part of the Amazon platform. They get shipping through Prime, and I can picture where all the stuff is in the warehouses because I've toured a warehouse. So as a customer, this seems to be a really strong model, and I like it. I really like the selection that it enables. If you separate out the third-party sellers again, I don't think I'd search both places. So I just don't. This really, from a customer point of view, it just does not feel like it's broken. The other thing, bigness drives a lot of this, and I think there was another view of what Amazon's size enables it to do in a report that they put out on October 1st, again at the Day One blog. And it was an update on their initiative to build COVID testing labs and to keep frontline employees safe. They are conducting thousands of tests daily. They're going to go to 50,000 tests a day at 650 sites by November. And the whole point is to identify asymptomatic carriers of COVID, catch it earlier before it spreads, do testing, and then do tracing to identify people that need to be quarantined and stay home. They have health insurance that's available to everybody from the first day on the job, and there's time off for anybody quarantined or treated. They hired a 5,000-member global safety team. I guess they identified it from employees, and they've made storage and process changes. They've distributed 100 million masks. They're cleaning these places every 90 minutes. They're doing a lot. Now, the proof is in the data, which they, by testing 1.3 million Amazon Whole Foods frontline employees employed anytime during the period March 1st to September 19th, and then comparing it to the general population per Johns Hopkins data, if the Amazon employees had been having COVID at the same rate as the general population, there would have been 33,952 cases among the Amazon workers. In fact, there were only 19,816 cases, or 42% lower than the general population. And I think it's fair to say that's because they're spending $1 billion to try to keep the warehouses safe and to have it be a good place to work and have it be sustainable. So, much smaller company wouldn't be able to do that. Amazon's pressuring other big companies to reveal these kinds of numbers so people can see what's working and what isn't. And that's one aspect of the size of a company that makes it possible. I've got a couple of quick tech tips for you. One is this 450-page report is a PDF, which you'll see a link to it in Stephen Levy's article. So I downloaded it to my hard drive, and then I dragged it to the icon I have on my Mac that says Send to Kindle, and I chose to save it as Kindle format rather than PDF. And the reason I do that is it enables me to highlight the document if I'm going to write about it or just do some research as I'm reading it on my devices. It's really helpful to have it in Kindle format. As it doesn't look as pretty that way because the PDF has it just as the committee wanted to release it, but it's much more convenient and very readable. Now, one thing that's a little bit odd is I like to highlight a document like this and then send the notes to myself by email, and then I can print them out. I can just see all of these notes. I can't do that from the Oasis, and the Oasis is kind of the premier, most expensive Kindle, but that ability to share my highlights with myself or anybody else is just not there. The Kindle app on the iPad or the Fire has a very simple way to do it. There's just a way to share the notes, and off it comes. But as a result, I have the document in my system. I'd kind of like to read it all. I have a feeling it's going to be a document that's referred to a lot. So I read the Mueller report, and maybe I'll read this, or at least the Amazon parts of it too. The other tech tip I've discovered, we have an extensive Echo network. Dad's got one at his place, and we have some back at our place in Denver, which we're in the process of selling. So there were some movers there this week, remotely packing boxes, guided by Darlene and me from the Echo show. And as she was talking to the movers from her Echo show downstairs, I was in an Echo show conversation with my dad, and I realized we had two separate connections going over 4 different devices on the network, and I would have thought maybe you could only have one at a time, but I have a feeling that maybe there's an unlimited number of different conversations you can have if you have lots of these devices that you can talk to people on. So that was kind of interesting. Well, I took longer than I thought I was going to for the Amazon stuff, so let's go right to the interview. And I'll tell you that Dean Koontz has published more than 100 novels, selling more than 500 million copies of those books worldwide. That's an amazing number. And the latest was published last week. It's Elsewhere, a mind-bending thriller based on simultaneous multiple universes. I connected with Dean by Skype and phone Friday, October 2nd. That's 4 days before Elsewhere's publication date, and I reached him at his home where he was in the midst of chaos related to a problem with his computer keyboard.
My assistant, who is the techie person, is in Utah playing golf.
Oh.
And, of course, it's this morning that my keyboard suddenly freezes up on me.
Oh.
And I can't get into any of the computer stuff, and we're trying by phone to resolve the problem. So far, with no luck.
Oh, man. That is a version of hell to try to help somebody by phone when you can't see their screen and everything.
Especially somebody who's on a deadline and now is losing a few days. But I will calm down and survive. Meanwhile, I'll try to, God knows if I'll be coherent. But
well, maybe this will be a distraction. So now, do you have 20 minutes to 30 minutes to spare here, or what's your next event?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Elsewhere is a fascinating look at something I didn't really know from quantum physics, the possibility of infinite number of parallel universes side by side. And I wondered how you first got interested in this hypothesis from quantum physics.
Well, I read in science for pleasure, and I don't read for ideas, but of course anything you read starts feeding your subconscious, and things come along. So all of this science interest of mine has sprung ideas into my head for other books. I always thought I'd never write about a story set in the multiverse or with a parallel world, because it would turn into too much of a sci-fi, phantasmagorical sort of thing. And I like to write about real people in our time, real issues in our time, not so much political or social issues as human issues of our time. And so I never thought that kind of story would work for me. But then I was, one day when I wasn't doing anything related to work, I realized I'd never written a story about a father-daughter relationship. And I started thinking about that, and that evolved into, well, where's the mother? And it'd be interesting if she walked out on them 7 years ago, and the girl's now 11 and yearning for her mother, and nobody knows what happened to the mother, but it presumes she is dead. And then I thought, yeah, but that's not a story. And then I thought, well, what if there is a chance that they could find her? I thought, well, that's a little bit too conventional a story for a Koontz novel. And that was when the parallel world thing came to me. Well, I've been reading about those for 30 years, about the multiverse, ever since it was proposed all the way back in the 50s. So I thought, maybe this is a story, and I can keep it where it isn't so fantastic by grounding it in a little California coastal town where all of the action takes place. And it just sort of evolved from there. And it shows the benefit, for me anyway, of reading stuff that you think will never have any use to you at all as a writer of the sort of thing you write. And then one day, bang, it all falls together.
Well, you've said that each book, there are periods of self-doubt through the process. I can imagine that the self-doubt creeps in when all the pieces haven't fallen together yet. You've got them spinning around and as possibilities. It must be satisfying when you make a leap like that turns out to work. Yeah,
it's when starting this, my biggest thing with Elsewhere was that we don't get confused, that the reader doesn't get confused. I can get confused multiple times in the writing, but then straighten it out before the reader ever sees it. But I was concerned because there's different versions of this little beach town. Will this be easy to follow? Will it flow right? And so far, everybody tells me that it does and is very simple and easy to follow. So yeah, as that began to come together, and as the father and daughter relationship began to be a lot of fun, then it's gratifying. If it doesn't work though in 20 pages or 30 pages, I have learned to give it up. Start all over, or find a new idea altogether, because characters, if they work, and the story, if it works, will start working pretty soon into it. There will be hitches, there will be problems, but if it's not singing by 30 pages, then it's a broken record. To mix metaphors there.
Right. A key part of it working is the character of Ed Harkenback. Let's tell the listeners who he is and how did he make himself known to you in a way that made you hope his story was going to work.
Well, I thought it would be interesting if these two, Jeffy and Amity, the father and his 11-year-old daughter, are brought to power to move across realities by the most unlikely of all possible deliverers of such a device. And we have a homeless problem here. And as they make raids on the various, when the encampments get so large and dangerous, and then they're sort of cleaned out, some of the homeless have moved into the kind of, not into the wilderness, but out of the towns and stuff, into camping areas in the woods of the canyons. And I thought, what if there was a little encampment like that up at the end of the street on which Jeffy and Amity live? And what if one of those homeless people was this fellow who seems very atypical? He wears a jacket and a shirt and a bow tie. He goes into town every day for his shower, and on the way to and from their house, before the book ever opens, he has stopped to chat with Jeffy, the father, and they have sat on the front porch a few times. So I thought this would be a cool kind of character to bring them what in the book is called the key to everything, this device. And one night he shows up on their porch and hands Jeffy a gift box and says, here, it's a kind of soiled old gift box tied up in string. It says, here, keep this for a year. Don't open it. For God's sake, never touch it. And if I'm not back in a year, it'll mean they found me and I'm dead. So then put this in a barrel, fill the barrel with concrete, take it out in the ocean, and sink it in 1,000 feet of water. And it costs $76 billion to make, and some very bad people are after it. And Jeffy thinks, wow, this seemed like a kind of ordinary guy, even if homeless, but he didn't seem like mentally ill or anything, but obviously there's a strange side to him. Except in the morning, some really dangerous people show up looking for that key to everything, and suddenly it's clear that Spooky Ed, this homeless guy, who Amity calls Spooky Ed, is not maybe crazy after all.
Yeah. I was imagining Ed's challenge to find somebody he could trust with this, and I guess that's what the conversations on the porch where he's getting to know Jeffy Coltrane. But what do you think Ed sees in Jeffy that makes him choose him or trust him with this impossible situation?
Well, Jeffy's a guy who prefers the world as it once was compared to the high-tech world as it is. He restores Bakelite radios from the 20s and 30s, which were quite beautiful objects, and he restores them and polishes up the Bakelite and sells them at antique shows. And he collects old posters from that period, and he's sort of a dreamer, reads fantasy novels, he and his daughter, and is kind of a very down-to-earth, humble sort of guy. And I think what Spooky Ed would have been looking for at Harkenbach was first and foremost humility, because with humility generally comes a degree of honesty and trustworthiness. And he certainly saw that humility in Jeffy, which I think is, and Jeffy's ability as a kind of dreamer and a reader of fantasy novels to maybe accept this if, God forbid, he ever opened the box and touched the device. So I think Ed looked at all of those things as he was deciding, okay, this is the guy to do it.
One of the timelines that Ed visits is a pretty nice one, and he says the servant robots were efficient, cute, friendly, but not self-aware because artificial intelligence had been outlawed. And it made me wonder if you have an Alexa device yet filled with AI, and if you were the head of technology for the country or the world, would you put a stop to AI, thinking of your very favorable portrait of a world where AI was nipped in the bud and all you had was these sort of cute robots running around that couldn't wreck anything?
Well, the other thing about that world is they very clearly were pretty level-headed, because there's a lot of things that we've gone nuts on in our world that they didn't in theirs. But Stephen Hawking, a number of people have said AI could turn out to be the death of humanity.
Yeah.
So there's some pretty heavy thinkers are concerned about this. And I don't think James Cameron was 100% right with the Terminator, but it does raise that issue. Now, I think AI will give us all kind of benefits, but it'll give us all kind of problems as well. Probably not robots rising up and self-producing. That's a little far out there, but who knows? I just thought it was kind of fun to say, instead of getting more and more high-techy and everything, this is a world that kind of mastered its advanced technology instead of letting the advanced technology master it.
Yeah. As I was reading it and imagining that there are multiple universes for my life, here in a quiet place during the pandemic in Maine, and it got to be almost a meditation, because in any given day, it seems like I can choose to be a little kinder than I feel like, a little more selfish. I can watch Netflix or practice a song on my guitar. I have all these choices in any day. And I think I found the idea that there really are other versions of me in these other universes making different choices. It didn't get me off the hook. It made me think, well, all I know is I'm the master of this universe, and so therefore, what decisions am I going to make, hoping it's, as good a version of me as exists out there. But as you lived with this story, moving within worlds, did you find it had any effect on how kind you are, or just your, as a working hypothesis for your life, did it have any benefits or drawbacks to how good a person you were while you were writing this book?
Well, one thing I knew that was going to sort of turn up at the end of this, because once I knew I was going to write a story like this, I wanted to keep it as down to earth as possible, and it made me start thinking about the ramifications of all this, rather than just thinking of it as a fun sort of idea. And one thing that occurred to me, because it occurs to me over and over, areas I'm particularly intrigued by are quantum mechanics, chaos theory, and molecular biology. And in molecular biology, faster and faster now, but over the last few decades, we look at a layer of reality down in the cellular level on what goes on within a cell. And I mean, 150 years ago or 100 years ago, the human cell was thought to be just a little blob of protoplasm, and how it functioned was a little bit of a mystery, but nobody thought it was all that complex. Now we know that in every cell there are thousands of proteins in huge, long chains of proteins, and without any of the links in any of those chains of proteins, the cell can't function. So you're looking at an incredible complexity that just takes your breath away when you read about the function of each of those proteins and the function of each of the many parts of a cell. And then some years go by, And suddenly it is discovered that what was felt to be the base of that cellular structure is not the base of that cellular structure. This is putting it in simpler terms, but there is another level of complexity under that. And these things never get simpler. Every level you go to is more complex than the level above it. And I find that absolutely fascinating for a whole series of reasons. And in biology, I have a lot of friends who are scientists, too, because of all this, my interest for 50 years in all of this. But the public, the common thing about, where ignorance reigns, is the idea that science has explained everything. It actually hasn't. Science never fully explains anything. Science is a means of finding knowledge, and the knowledge it finds often turns out 10 years later to have been wrong because we found something else that disputes that. And that certainly happens a great deal as we've gone into molecular biology. We see these levels of the world, and science can not tell you the meaning of life. It can't tell you why. It can only, at best, tell you how, as science understands it at the moment. So one of the things that happens is people point at science and say, well, this means the world has no meaning. It has no anything except accidental design. But actually, science is showing us exactly the opposite. It's showing us a bizarre and intricate design beyond anything we comprehended even 25 years ago. And one of the areas, when I started thinking about the multiverse, that there's not one universe, but an infinite number of them, and many, many copies of us until we have passed away in each one. I started thinking, this does not prove a world without meaning. It actually proves a world with meaning. And as I say in the end of the book, a world of infinite mercy, a creation of infinite mercy. If we screw up in one life, we have another life beside it in which we have the opportunity to make the better choice and the right choice. And that becomes kind of a theme at the end of the book that ties up all that goes on within the book. I rambled a bit there, but I hope that was coherent.
Well, that's fascinating. If that was like a replacement of traditional religion, East, West, whatever, what would be the implications on our behavior if we all accepted that that was true and there was infinite mercy built in to the code of the universe, and if we didn't get it right here, we might get it right somewhere elsewhere? Do you think that we would behave better in the version of the universe that we exist in, or about the same, or would it matter?
Actually, I don't think this changes anything in any religion. It simply says the complexity of the design is much bigger than we ever imagined it. Every religion is man's interpretation, whether it's claimed it's from the voice of God speaking through those who found religion, or however, it is still our fumbling attempt to understand the divine or the meaning of creation. So if it were that there was a multiverse, and every human life, as I said at the end, is like a tree of many branches, and after all that tree is fully grown, in other words, after you have perished in every infinite world, you will perish in all of them. In none of them are you going to live forever. Mm-hmm. But when you've lived in all of them, it occurred to me, your life is like a tree. It's got all these branches, and what is the shape of the tree? And therefore, it still depends on your behavior, on your kindness, and it's just that there are many opportunities to resolve that. And it's kind of a fascinating concept. It seems to me. I'll be interested to see the feedback I get on that.
Kind of infinite shots at redemption, not just one life to get sober in. You said you generally like to write about human issues as opposed to politics, but there's some fairly political ruminations. In one timeline, the question is asked, was this version of America a stable democracy, or might it be teetering on the brink of tyranny, and I don't want to draw you more into the political realm than you're willing to venture in a conversation like this, but how would you answer that question today in terms of whether we're teetering on the brink of tyranny or not?
Well, all I'll say is that we're living in a time where it's the most strange, upended time I've ever seen. And I'm afraid that you can't trust labels anymore because people apply labels to themselves, movements apply labels to themselves that are highly deceptive. And in the little world you're talking about, I don't want to give any away because a lot of fun stuff happens in that world. Dark and strange and frightening stuff, but I don't want to give any of it away. But I would say the element that occurred to me, and it's occurred to me for a long time, that a lot of the labels we use don't mean what they used to mean. And there's a lot of people who call themselves this or that, who are actually the opposite of, and you wonder whether they know that or whether it's, and whether they know it and it's an intentional cloaking, or whether they are ignorant of the true meaning of the words. And in my little world, parallel world, it's a world where fascism is definitely taking over, but they call themselves anti-fascists. And that little dark world we see there, where Amity and Jeffy show up on a porch hoping that the missing mother lives there in this world, find something else altogether that's a little more than a little disturbing. And I'm just sort of playing with that. I don't get into politics of our world ever too much unless it deals with a human issue. Basically for this, if you start writing fiction from a political perspective, it's not art anymore, it's propaganda. And there are, from the history of American literature, you can see a lot of that in the writing of the 20s and 30s and 40s. I'm not going to mention names, but some writers highly heralded then who are unreadable today because because history passed them over, and what should have been art was propaganda, and it doesn't last.
Yeah, exactly. Your bad guy, John Falkirk, is definitely not a nice guy, a bad guy, but I thought he wasn't as bad a guy as Lee Shackett, the character who produced such mayhem and Devoted. And I'm thinking sort of the violence component, that Lee Shackett actually did really terrible things in Devoted. Part of the satisfaction of that story was how that all got resolved. But Falkirk, at one point, he's thinking of doing really horrible things to Amity, but he doesn't. And I wondered, as these standalone novels proceed and you're exploring big human issues, do you think that you might be sort of stepping back from some of the explicit violence in the plots that are sort of a characteristic of some of your older work? Well,
I've never been a gore writer. I even spoke out about that. Novels full of blood and guts and long, loving descriptions are not of an interest to me. But I don't shy from violence when I think it is endemic to the particular character. And Shackett in Devoted he's going off the deep end in more ways than one. He's going off the deep end psychologically, but also physiologically. And in elsewhere, Falkirk, the key difference between them two is that as Shackett in Devoted is physiologically going off the deep end, he's becoming an incredibly dangerous predator and very savage. Falkirk is at base a coward. So while he dreams of more violence, he isn't always capable of doing it. And although toward the end, he gets keyed up to doing some pretty bad things, which he gets right on the brink of fully committing with the girl. But he's more of a talker than a doer, and more of a self-glamorizer than somebody who would actually do some of the things he wishes he'd do. Now, he's perfectly capable of instructing other people to do it.
Right.
And surrounding himself with the kind of people who won't think twice about doing it. So that is sort of the difference between those characters, I think.
Yeah. Devoted had you, it was as if you were signing your signature to that book with the Kindle in Motion, but I don't remember any other actual animations. Are there any more elaborate Kindle in Motion animations in elsewhere in the electronic version?
Well, I know there is they've got an animated cover on it, and
okay.
I think might be online already. Yeah, I'm sure it must be. I've just been looking at the animated cover for the next book, which is really cool.
Great.
It's got a really creepy animated cover.
Yeah.
And I've never, this is amazing stuff. Of course, it's right down Amazon's alley to do this, but it's also true that I am just as much as I like ebooks, I will always be a physical book guy because that's what I grew up with.
Right.
And the quality of physical books in a lot of New York publishing has just plummeted over the last 10 years. And it was dismaying to me to see poorly bound books and ill-conceived packages, let's say. And one thing I love about Thomas and Mercer and Amazon is the physical books are gorgeous.
Wow.
Elsewhere, if you take the jacket off the physical book of Elsewhere and look at the boards, they're designed with this beautiful design, and they just don't do that in New York. I said to somebody there at Thomas and Mercer, my editor actually, this is amazing, and said, well, we have this philosophy. People lose the dust jacket or it tears, and we want them, when they take the book off the shelf and it doesn't have a dust jacket, to say, oh, look how pretty this is. And I thought, see, you just don't get that anymore. And it's that appeals to me a lot. So I'm happy with the physical books as well.
That's kind of touching, knowing that this is coming from the company that created the Kindle and the ebook, that they have that much reverence for the physical book. That's pretty cool.
They designed the book in a different way than I've seen it done in New York, and it's and also better bindings, so the book is going to last, and it's just very heartening to see that for an old bookie guy like me. As a bookie, I don't mean taking bets, but
right. Well, I think it's been about 6 months since Devoted was released, and that was your first full-length novel published by Amazon. Without prying into issues of money, but I am interested in sort of the business of publishing. Is it soon enough for you to have a feeling of the financial benefits to you as the author of publishing with Amazon Publishing compared to what your experience might have been in the first 6 months of a comparable novel published by the Big Five?
I think it always takes with a publisher at least a year to know. And especially in New York, which every feedback is very, very slow in traditional publishing. And there's the additional thing here that because of certain attitudes, Amazon or Thomas and Mercer books are not carried in a number of bookstores like Barnes & Noble and so forth. So that impacts physical sales. Then there are stores that carry them, like Poison Pen. I'm doing an event with Poison Pen next week. And so it's a complicated thing, but I would say for sure we're probably going to sell as many or more books because I imagine going to sell more Kindle. There's also the nameless stories I've been doing, and we've had so many. I think we're approaching 3 million downloads of the nameless stories. And they asked me to write 6 more, which I'm in the process of doing if my keyboard doesn't keep freezing up. And it's, I have to say that one of the things that matters, even aside from not just being just frank, if it still was about money with me, I'd have stopped years ago.
Right.
Because it always has been about something else. It's the love of the books. It's the books changed my life when I was a kid and allowed me to escape a really unpleasant childhood. And when you get mail from other people that the books have had that kind of meaning for, that it sounds phony, but it's true. It gives your day meaning. And if you love storytelling and love the language, as much as this is work, and it is work, it is hard, but it's also play at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I don't know what I'd be doing if I wasn't doing it. And to deal with people who get excited and are energetic about all this and creative about marketing and packaging, it just excites you further. So at this point, I would say it's a success for me outside of what the economics ultimately are.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Well, we'll finish up. I was listening to some of the previous times we've talked, and at one point you were sharing how Elsa is able to learn new words with remarkable speed, and there was this would have been almost a year ago. So she'd learned the meaning of French fries, and it created quite a reaction in her. Is she still learning words? Has she learned anything new like that in the last week that has delighted and amazed you?
I'm not sure about the last week, but, sometimes it doesn't dawn on you that she's responding to a word. You think she's responding to a routine. And then it'll happen that you see her respond to the word outside the routine. And when, for instance, in this morning after this was about a couple of weeks ago, after her morning feeding and everything, my wife, Gerda, comes down while Elsa's eating. She gets her morning coffee, takes it to the bedroom and says, Elsa, come on, upstairs. And Elsa leads the way, and they go up, but it's routine. Yeah. And the other day we were talking, and I said, well, I think we're getting ready to move at the end of the month. And I said, well, I think I'd put that upstairs. And Elsa perked her ears up, looked at me, and went dashing to the stairs.
No way.
And that was the moment I realized. So since then, I've been saying, I'll look at her and say, upstairs, and she'll get up and go to the stairs.
Oh, my.
And I realize constantly that there's more of these things happening, but you overlook them because it just seems it's in context of routine, and it isn't. So, but she's a joy. We've had 3 wonderful Goldens, and she is the most affectionate of all 3, and they are a very affectionate breed. So that means an awful lot in life.
We got a puppy at the start of the pandemic, a little Mickey, tiny little dog, and she plays out at low tide on the beach here with a poodle named Gidget. My wife and Gidget's mother, they go for miles. And when I see those 2 dogs together, the joy and the jumping around and all that, I've talked to my wife about this. Is it sort of sad to not have 2 dogs when you see how much fun 2 dogs have with each other? Or do you ever think of ending Elsa's time as an only child?
It is an issue that we sometimes think about. My sister-in-law lived here near us for a while, and she had a dog, and they would get together and play. And you watch it, and you think, okay, once you see all of that, it means every day I have to give her an hour of that kind of playtime. She gets such an expression of delight when you just getting down on the floor, saying, come here. And then she comes romping at you, and you do a little wrestling, you do some tug, and at the end of usually it's about a half hour, then she's panting up a storm, just flops down beside me on the floor, and we cuddle for a while. But sometimes I think I'm shortchanging her in her doggy life, but I am of an age, I'm not sure. She's a strong she's 6. She'll be 6. Wait, what day is today?
October 3rd or 2nd? I think it's the 2nd, yeah.
2nd. Today's her birthday.
Oh,
my God.
Nice. Cool.
She's 6 today. So,
and she's pretty strong, probably.
She is very strong. When she wants to go somewhere, she's a very well-behaved dog, but if you're on a walk and she wants to sniff something 10 feet to one side, you can't make her stop. She will get to it. And so 2 of them, I'm not sure at my age I could fully handle it. So.
They might pull you apart if they wanted to sniff on things on the opposite side of the street.
Yeah.
Well, that's good. I hope you solve your keyboard problem. Sometimes when you ignore these problems, they just solve themselves. So maybe when you turn back, it will have given up its grip on your day.
That's my assistant said, just turn everything off and let it sit for a while. Change the batteries in the keyboard. And once in a while, that's all it needs.
Yeah. Well, I'll hope that's true. I have been speaking with Dean Koontz, the author of more than 100 novels, including his latest thriller, Elsewhere, set for release on October 6th from Thomas & Mercer. Thanks very much, Dean. Good to talk with you.
Same here. You take care.
That's it for this week. I reached out to Stephen Levy to see if he'd be available to talk with us next week about the antitrust report. I haven't heard back from him yet, but I'm hopeful, and if he can't, we'll find somebody else to talk to. I really appreciate your taking the time to listen to my show. Have a good day. Bye.